Revision is going to be the key factor that's going to affect how well you know your geography and how well you can remember it. So I'm going to give you 4 examples of revision techniques that you can use. My personal favourite revision technique is going to be to have notes. I'm a very visual learner, so that's what helps me the most, but obviously that depends on what kind of learner you are. Notes can be taken in many different formats, so it's completely up to you how you choose to take your notes. Personally, I like to have an A3 summary sheet of notes per unit. Each A3, and therefore each unit, is split into 12 sections. I actually got this idea of the 12 sections from my teacher when he gave us a revision clock, which was basically just a clock on an A3 sheet, which separated the unit into 12. So on each A3 sheet, I had 12 different squares representing 12 different sections of the unit. Here is one of my revision sheets so you can see what I mean by that. As I said before, I'm a very visual learner, so these notes are really useful for me, but the efficiency of this revision technique is going to vary from person to person. My second favourite revision technique is past paper questions. Although notes are very useful to learn the content, I think that past paper questions are the best revision technique when it comes to actually preparing for exams. Past paper questions allow you to apply the knowledge that you've learned to answer a question. You can find plenty of exam questions and past papers online. Also, your teacher can probably guide you to some good resources to find past paper questions. You could even ask them to write you an original exam question that you would have to answer, and potentially make it a regular thing. For example, you could ask them for an exam question to answer every week. Flashcards are another very good revision technique. I personally don't use them because I don't find them very useful for me, but I have plenty of friends who do find them very useful. For those of you who might not know what flashcards are, they're basically little pieces of card with a question side and an answer side. In geography, you could use them, for example, to revise your definitions. On one side you would have the word, and on the other you'd have the definition. You could revise those by either looking at the word and giving the definition, or the other way around, by looking at the definition and giving the word. Flashcards could also be used for case studies to help you remember data. For example, the question could be, how much did it cost to build this power plant? And on the other side you would have the answer. For those of you who might struggle to remember definitions or key pieces of information, I think flashcards are definitely the way to go. These tools can provide you with a range of different revision techniques, from flashcards to little quizzes. These are also very useful for when you're revising with friends or in study groups. For example, each person could make a quiz on the unit or on the topic that they're most comfortable with, and test the others. Compared to your flashcards or your notes, this revision technique can be very useful because you, most of the time, will not have been the one making the test. Because of this, it will feel a bit more like an actual exam, and you don't know what questions to expect. Since you won't know what you'll be tested on, you won't have prepared any answers to particular questions, so you'll have to think a bit more carefully. Pre-exam revision is very important because that's what influences how prepared you will be in terms of content. However, exam technique is also very important, so here are my 5 top tips. Tip number 1 is time management. It's crucial that you learn how to manage your time properly during an exam. Know in advance what the exam structure will be like, so you can plan how long you will take for each question. For example, in paper 1, standard level students have 1 hour 30, and high level students have 2 hours 50. That means you can spend no longer than 45 minutes on each option. You may take less time, and that's great because you will have time at the end to review what you wrote. But do not spend any more time than planned. Don't stay stuck on a question, especially if it's worth very few marks. Don't risk not being able to answer a 10-mark question because you got stuck on a question worth only 2 marks. My tip number 2 would be to read the questions carefully. The questions are not meant to trick you, but if you don't read them carefully, they will. And trust me on this one, I speak from personal experience. I tend to go way too quickly during exams, meaning that I will miss some key information in the questions, or sometimes even miss a whole question. I know I said to not stay stuck on a question for too long, but do take the time to read it carefully. Use a highlighter if you need. I would recommend that you read through the question once, and then you read it again and highlight 2 main things. The first one being the commenter, which is going to indicate how they want you to answer the question. And the second, any specific key terms that you need to use as clues that will basically just guide you to the answer. By doing this, You'll be reading the question more carefully and picking up all the information that you need to answer this question correctly. Tip number 3 is to never leave blanks. Ever. These exams don't penalize wrong answers, so take advantage of that and answer every single question. Even if you have no clue what to write down, anything that comes to mind that may be relevant, write it down. It may be wrong, but at least you tried. And sometimes that try may get you a few marks just for making that connection. You probably won't get full marks, but hey, a few marks are better than none. And a blank is always going to be worth 0. Tip number 4 would be to answer in relation to the whole question. This may seem obvious, but it's not actually something that people tend to think about. What I mean by the whole question is that if there is an infographic, a picture, a table, anything that is associated to that question, use it. Use and refer to the information that you are given in and with the question. Use terms for the infographic in your answer. Use the data from the table in your answer. Basically, just use all the information that you're given. The only exception would be if the command terms asks you specifically not to do that. For example, state asks you to give only the right answer without any sort of explanation or calculation. But other than that, use the information you're given in your answer. My last tip is to plan your essays before you write them. This applies specifically to larger questions in the exam that are going to be worth 10 marks and above. The reason as to why these questions are worth more marks is because they are looking for a more elaborated answer, both in terms of the content and the structure. Take some time to plan your essay before you write it, especially high-level students in paper 3. I would do it on a separate piece of paper or just below the question if I have space. Your plan should basically involve all of your ideas in the form of bullet points, ideally. You basically need to write down what you're going to be writing about in your introduction, what your body paragraphs are going to be like, and what your conclusion is going to say. It doesn't really matter how you choose to plan. The only important thing is that you do plan. Your plan will be the base of your essay structure, and it will also be a means of condensing all the information that you're going to need to write about in a couple bullet points. I would even recommend that you actually spend more time on the plan than on the writing. That was my case in exams. I would spend more time on my plan, and then actually having to write the essay would be much easier since all of the information that I needed to write about was already there.